HH's global recognition shocks critics. Is Zambia's new dawn finally working? For years, Zambia struggled for relevance on the global stage. Now suddenly, international newspapers, financial institutions, and global observers are paying attention again. President Hakainde Hichilema is being recognized abroad, but here at home, the reaction is deeply divided. Supporters say this is proof that the new dawn is real. Critics say it's hype. So what exactly is the world seeing in Zambia that some Zambians still doubt? And is this global recognition symbolic, or does it reflect real transformation? Tonight, we separate emotion from evidence. Good day, viewers. Welcome to another edition of the InspirAfrica Official. I'm Nakash. Well, what a week it's been across the African continent. From economic summits to political shakeups, there's been no shortage of stories that demand our attention. But today, we're focusing on something truly extraordinary happening in southern Africa. Our lead story: how a 64-year-old economist from Zambia became Africa's most unexpected revolutionary. Picture this: a landlocked nation, once drowning in debt, its treasury looted, its people desperate. The lights flickering out across cities every single day. International creditors circling like vultures. And then, against all odds, a quiet-spoken businessman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses steps into State House, and within months, the impossible begins to happen. But here's where the story gets fascinating. What happens when a president doesn't just promise change, but actually delivers it? What happens when a leader in a continent often defined by broken promises and corruption scandals actually keeps his word? And what happens when that leader isn't a fiery populist or a military strongman, but an accountant who traded his corporate boardroom for the presidential palace? How did Hakainde Hichilema go from being imprisoned by his predecessor to becoming the man who would shock the world? What secrets lay behind his unprecedented debt restructuring deal, the first of its kind to succeed under the G20's common framework? And why are world leaders from Washington to Beijing suddenly watching this landlocked nation of 20 million people with such intense interest? Could Zambia's quiet transformation be the blueprint Africa has been waiting for? Or is this another false dawn, a temporary reprieve before reality comes crashing back? And perhaps most importantly, in a continent where presidents often cling to power indefinitely, what happens when one of them actually governs like democracy matters? Factual foundation, background and timeline. The revelation came to light on August 12, 2021, when Zambians defied expectations and voted out Edgar Lungu's Patriotic Front government in a landslide election. Hakainde Hichilema, known affectionately as HH or Bally to his supporters, won with nearly 60% of the vote, capturing 2.8 million votes to Lungu's 1.8 million. But to understand the magnitude of this shock, we need to rewind to what Hichilema inherited. By 2021, Zambia had become Africa's first pandemic-era sovereign default. The national debt stood at a crushing $17.27 billion, nearly 130% of GDP. The previous administration had borrowed heavily from both traditional Western creditors and China, funding infrastructure projects that often seemed to benefit the ruling party more than ordinary Zambians. The economy was in free fall. Inflation had skyrocketed to over 24%. The Zambian kwacha had become one of the world's worst-performing currencies. Perhaps most visibly, the country faced up to 20 hours of daily power cuts, what Zambians called load shedding, crippling businesses and plunging homes into darkness. This wasn't Hichilema's first attempt at the presidency. The man who would eventually shock the world had actually lost 5 times before, in 2006, 2008, 2011, 2015, and 2016. In 2017, he had been arrested and charged with treason after his motorcade allegedly refused to give way to President Lungu's convoy. He spent 4 months in prison in what international observers widely condemned as political persecution. Then came the turning point. Within his first 100 days in office, President Hichilema made moves that left observers stunned. He didn't purge the civil service. He didn't launch retaliatory investigations against his predecessor, at least not immediately. Instead, he did something almost unheard of: he got to work. By June 2023, Zambia achieved what many thought impossible, reaching a comprehensive debt restructuring agreement worth $6.3 billion with official creditors, including China, under the G20 Common Framework. This was the first successful restructuring under this mechanism, making Zambia a test case for other struggling African nations. The International Monetary Fund approved a $1.3 billion bailout program. Inflation began to fall from 24% in 2021 to single digits by 2024. The kwacha stabilized and even strengthened. By 2024, Zambia's economic growth projections had turned positive, with GDP growth expected to reach 4.7%. But perhaps the most visible change came in December 2024, when President Hichilema stood before Parliament and announced that Zambia would end the devastating power cuts that had paralyzed the nation for years. And remarkably, it actually happened. Direct evidence, quotes and testimony. In a speech to Parliament that went viral across African social media, President Hichilema addressed the nation's energy crisis with unusual candor. Fellow Zambians, I want to speak to you honestly about where we are. When we took office, our generation capacity had fallen to dangerous levels. The Kariba Dam, which provides nearly 40% of our electricity, was at historically low levels due to drought. But what made this crisis worse? What made it unforgivable was mismanagement, corruption, and a failure to plan. He paused, adjusting his glasses, before continuing. We inherited a situation where load shedding wasn't just about drought, it was about the previous government's failure to invest in alternative energy sources, failure to maintain existing infrastructure, and, quite frankly, using ZESCO as a piggy bank for political interests. During a Bloomberg interview in September 2024, when pressed about his relationship with China, Zambia's largest creditor, Hichilema chose his words carefully. Look, China is an important partner for Zambia. They're a creditor, yes, but they're also an investor and a trading partner. What I've said consistently is this. We will work with China, we will work with the West, we will work with anyone who respects Zambian sovereignty and who understands that these partnerships must be mutually beneficial. The journalist interrupted, but Mr. President, there were concerns that China would refuse to participate in debt restructuring. Hichilema smiled slightly, and yet, here we are. The agreement is signed. What does that tell you? It tells you that when you approach negotiations with respect, with transparency, and with a genuine commitment to repay what you can afford to repay, people listen. China listened. Our Western partners listened. The IMF listened. In a remarkable moment during a town hall in Lusaka's Kanyama compound, a young woman stood up and challenged the president directly. Mr. President, you promised us jobs. You promised us that things would get better. But I'm still struggling. My brother is still unemployed. When will we see the change you promised? Instead of deflecting, Hichilema responded. Thank you for that question, and thank you for your honesty. Here's what I'll tell you, I can't fix 10 years of economic mismanagement in 2 years or even 3 years. I wish I could. But here's what we've done so far, we've stabilized the currency, which means the money you earn isn't losing value as quickly. We've brought back the lights, which means businesses can operate, which means they can hire. We've cleared salary arrears for civil servants. We've increased the Constituency Development Fund so that communities like this one can start their own projects. He paused, making eye contact with the young woman. But you're right to hold me accountable. That's your job as a citizen. That's democracy. Keep asking these questions. Keep demanding answers. Because the moment you stop asking is the moment we stop delivering. The response drew applause even from skeptics in the crowd. During the crucial debt negotiation period, Zambia's finance minister, Sitambiko Muzokatwain, described the delicate diplomatic dance in testimony before Parliament. We were walking a tightrope. On one side, you had traditional Paris Club creditors who wanted to see China take haircuts on their loans. On the other side, you had China who felt they were being unfairly targeted because of geopolitics. And in the middle, you had Zambia desperate for relief but also needing to maintain relationships with everyone. So what changed? A parliamentary committee member asked. What changed was, President Hichilema's personal intervention. He spoke directly with Chinese leadership. He spoke with U.S. Treasury officials. He spoke with the IMF managing director. And his message was consistent. We want to pay our debts. We will pay our debts. But we need time, and we need the terms to be sustainable. That credibility built over months of consistent messaging, that's what unlocked the deal. Deeper analysis, implications and reactions. The implications of Zambia's transformation under Hichilema extend far beyond the country's borders, sending ripples across a continent that has grown weary of unfulfilled promises and cyclical disappointment. From opposition parties in Zambia, reactions have been predictably mixed. The Patriotic Front, still reeling from their 2021 electoral defeat, has accused Hichilema of taking credit for initiatives they claim were already in motion. Former President Edgar Lungu, in a rare public statement, argued that the foundations for Zambia's recovery were laid during our tenure, particularly in infrastructure development. However, independent economic analysts paint a different picture. Dr. Grieve Chelwa, a Zambian economist at the New School in New York, noted in a recent paper, "What we're seeing in Zambia is remarkable not because of any single policy innovation, but because of the restoration of basic institutional credibility. Hichilema's government has demonstrated that African nations can negotiate with international creditors from a position of honesty rather than desperation." The broader African response has been fascinating to observe. Kenya's President William Ruto reportedly consulted with Hichilema during Kenya's own debt crisis negotiations in 2024. Ghana, which defaulted on its debt in December 2022, has studied Zambia's restructuring framework closely. Even Ethiopia, navigating its own default, sent delegations to Lusaka to learn from Zambia's experience. But there are skeptics, and their concerns deserve consideration. Some analysts warn that Zambia's success may be difficult to replicate because it benefited from unique timing. Hitting its crisis during a period when China was actively seeking to demonstrate that it could be a responsible creditor amid growing Western criticism of its lending practices. Professor Carlos Lopez, former executive secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, offered this nuanced assessment. Zambia's case is instructive, but we must be careful about over-extrapolating. Yes, Hichilema played his hand well. But he also had cards to play. Zambia defaulted at a moment when both China and Western creditors had strong incentives to show that multilateral frameworks could work. The next country in crisis may not have that same geopolitical fortune. From a governance perspective, Hichilema's approach raises important questions about democratic leadership in Africa. Unlike many African presidents who consolidate power quickly, changing constitutions, weakening opposition, capturing judiciaries, Hichilema has maintained democratic norms. He hasn't attempted to remove presidential term limits. He's allowed opposition voices to operate freely. He's even endured uncomfortable scrutiny from independent media. Yet there are unresolved concerns. Human rights organizations have documented cases of police heavy-handedness against protesters. Questions remain about the prosecution of former officials. Is it justice or selective prosecution? The line between accountability and political revenge can be dangerously thin. On the economic front, ambiguities persist. While macroeconomic indicators have improved, poverty reduction remains sluggish. The recovery has yet to translate into widespread job creation, particularly for young people. And Zambia's copper-dependent economy remains vulnerable to global commodity price fluctuations. The energy situation, while improved, isn't permanently solved. The country has increased generation capacity and ended immediate load shedding, but long-term energy security requires continued investment in both hydropower and alternative sources, investments that will take years to materialize fully. Perhaps most critically, Zambia's debt burden, while restructured, hasn't disappeared. The country still owes billions. The question isn't whether Zambia can make payments in 2024 or 2025. The question is whether it can sustain fiscal discipline over decades, through multiple election cycles and different administrations. There's also the uncomfortable reality that Hichilema's business background, once seen as a strength, has raised eyebrows. He's one of Zambia's wealthiest citizens, with extensive agricultural and ranching interests. Critics argue that conflicts of interest are inevitable when a president has such extensive private sector holdings. His defenders counter that his business acumen is precisely what Zambia needed. What makes Zambia's story particularly resonant in 2024 is its timing. Across Africa, democratic backsliding has become a worrying trend. Coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Gabon. Contested elections in several countries. Rising authoritarianism masked as African solutions to African problems. Against this backdrop, Zambia's peaceful democratic transition, followed by competent technocratic governance, offers a different model, one that suggests democracy can deliver, that voters can choose wisely, and that accountability mechanisms can work. But it's a fragile model. One economic shock, one major corruption scandal, one authoritarian overreach could shatter the narrative. The world is watching Zambia not just to celebrate its success, but to see if that success can last. Well, there you have it, viewers, the remarkable story of how Zambia's president shocked the world, not through military might or populist rhetoric, but through something far more radical in African politics: steady, competent governance. Whether Hakainde Hichilema becomes a model for a new generation of African leadership, or whether Zambia's moment proves fleeting, remains to be seen. History will be the judge. But for now, what's undeniable is this. A continent watching from the sidelines, a man who refused to give up after 5 electoral defeats, and a nation that dared to hope that this time might be different. Thank you so much for watching this edition of InspirAfrica Official. I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Zambia's transformation is sustainable? Could this model work in other African nations? Or are we witnessing a unique confluence of circumstances that can't be replicated? We'll be back tomorrow with more stories that inspire, inform, and challenge us to think differently about Africa's future. Until then, this is Nakash, reminding you to stay curious, stay informed, and keep believing that real change is possible. See you tomorrow.